gospel is for all, the gospel is for all. Where sin has gone, let's go with grace, the gospel is for all.
Good morning. Over the last several weeks, we've been discussing the topic of evangelism, and we'll keep doing that today. We're leading up to, of course, the end of February, the last Sunday, and that following Monday and Tuesday. Brother Rob is going to be coming over from Jacksonville, and he works with House-to-House, Heart-to-Heart program. But it's the House-to-House, Heart-to-Heart School of Evangelism. And they, for several years, have been going to congregations and teaching, training members of the church in how to better evangelize the lost souls around us. And so it ought to be a great program. We're looking forward to him coming, he and his family coming and being with us. And we're doing some studies here, just trying to get our minds prepped and ready, because it's going to be an in-depth program when he comes. It's going to be a demanding program. And if we've already got our minds wrapped around at least somewhat of what we're doing, it should help us to be ready to receive what he brings and start putting it to use, start working at using it. When we think about evangelism, we've been talking in the last several weeks about truth. Obviously, when we're dealing with evangelism, truth is of the utmost importance. It will not help anybody to reach out to them with something that cannot save. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation, plain and simple. Whether it's for you, me, for anybody. If you're a Christian today, it's because of truth. And if anybody else is going to be a Christian, it's going to be because of truth. The nature of truth, the blessings that truth can bring to us that nothing else can bring. And as we studied about truth, then we started studying about what evangelism is. And of course, evangelism is spreading the truth, sowing the seed. Evangelism is not saving souls. Who saves souls? God does. How does God save souls? Through the gospel. That's right. God does the working of the saving, but he does it through the means of truth. So when we sow the seed, we are doing the work of evangelism, plain and simple. Today we're going to talk for a little while about prospecting. Any of you read anything about the old 49ers gold rush? I've read some history about some of that. It was always interesting to me. But what do prospectors do? They do a little digging. They do some work with streams where gold has been found. They go different places, either where gold has been found nearby or something that gives them some clue. I've never been a prospector. I've never done any prospecting, but it's interesting to me that people could just go out and start looking and know a little bit about the earth, about the elements, about things that are out there, so they know what to look for. And they go to areas and they start either working in the streams to see if they can find gold flecks. And if they find gold flecks that are washing down in the streams, then they know if they go uphill, if they follow that stream upward and keep checking as they go, eventually they can possibly find where that gold is coming out of the ground, how it's being washed out, how it's coming down in the little flecks. Now, some of them made a living out of just finding the flecks in the streams. They would pan, they'd work, and they'd gather up the gold flecks, put them in little containers until they built up enough, and then they'd travel somewhere where they could go sell the gold. Or some would follow the stream and go up, further up into the hill, wherever it was, and if they found the source, they might actually start picking and digging into the ground and into the rocks and try to find the veins of gold in the ground. It's a great thing to read about, to understand, to see, and realize how gold went from being an element in the ground to being something that people are using as exchange. When we think about prospecting, finding prospects for anything, we're dealing with something different. It's not just an element in the ground to go find and then you just work and dig it up and you've got it in hand. When you're dealing with people as prospects, it's always at least two persons involved. Different personalities, different attitudes, different thoughts, different backgrounds. In spiritual matters, different belief systems. So we're dealing with someone rather than something. I heard someone telling the other day, and it tickled my funny bone, about this four men in a congregation where they'd been studying and working on the ideas of evangelism, and they were so fired up and ready to study the Bible with anybody, and the four of them would go out and go to neighborhoods and try to talk to people and set up studies. And they were driving down the road, and there was a hitchhiker, somebody needing a ride going down the road, so they pulled over, and he got in the vehicle with them, and the first thing one of them said to him was, "Are you ready to die?" Probably not the best way to find a Bible study. Because the story that was told as a true story said the man immediately wanted them to pull over and let him out of the vehicle, and they could not convince him to stay. Yeah, it's going to kind of maybe scare somebody. How do we find prospects for Bible studies? What are some ways that you can think of that you might find someone who's willing to sit down and study?
First, you got to engage them in the study and then find out what kind of soil they are.
Well, that may come along.
Friends, family.
There you go. There you go. You may get to the point of the study, and that's great. But you could talk to friends. You could talk to family. You know, something Brother Ralph brought out yesterday. If you are living the gospel every day, and people see that in your life, when the opportunity comes up, you may tell people, I'm a Christian. I'm a member of the church. I'm faithful to God. I'm a servant of God, a disciple of Christ, a number of ways that could come across. And then they see how you live, the choices you make, that you don't do the worldly things that people around you do. He said, if you are living it, then there's the chance, if you live it and you speak about it, that people will talk to you when they have a spiritual thought, a spiritual question, a doubt, a struggle, a problem. If you're living it and you at times talk about it, and so they see that in you, that's an interest in your life, people will, when they want to ask a question, they have a spiritual concern, who are they going to talk to?
Someone they trust.
Someone they trust and that they see as a spiritual person. Yeah, if all he talked about football, if all you ever talk about with somebody's football and they have a spiritual concern in their life, they're probably not going to talk to you because they don't know that you have spiritual interest. Even if they don't see you as an authority or anything like that, if they know you have a similar interest, there's the possibility they'll approach you. You know, some of the best prospects that we will ever find in setting up a Bible study with someone, having a good spiritual discussion with them, and potentially then opening their eyes to the gospel, which can save souls, is people who are seeking it. They are actively seeking it. Those are going to be the best prospects. If you want to run numbers on it, those will be the greatest statistics of setting up Bible studies, seeing people go all the way through a Bible study, see them be converted by the gospel to Christ. That's going to be your greatest statistical number, is when somebody comes looking for it. Now, how do we have people come looking for it? It may be personal. It may be that somebody approaches you personally and says, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about something."
Maybe after a struggle or a tragedy.
very often, this is not saying people out there, this is saying all people. Very often when we go through some kind of difficulty, a trouble, a loss, we are more open at that time than at any other time. It's different if we go through something that's joyful. It's not just changes or big events. If we go through something that's joyful, that's happy, we're satisfied. We're having a good time. But when we go through something that is hurtful, losing a loved one, going through a strong sickness that's gotten us down, different things that can really hurt us, we are more open to other people than we typically are on a day-to-day basis when things are just going as we call it normally. And it's because when we struggle and when we suffer, we want help. We want understanding. We want sympathy and empathy. We want people to understand what we're going through, and we're, in that sense, going to be more open to them. When we have somebody that comes looking and says, I want to ask you a question, and the question is spiritual in nature. What you have just seen, whether you realize it or not, what you've just seen is somebody else opening the door. We were talking about door knocking a few weeks ago, and how difficult, statistically, it is to knock on a stranger's door, introduce yourself to them, tell them what you're doing, and actually get a Bible study set up. The numbers are low, because that's you coming into somebody else's safe place and saying, I want to intrude. I want to come into your place and disrupt everything. That's not easy to do. It's not usually very successful. It's not completely absence of success, but it's very low statistically. But when somebody comes to you, it's at the opposite end of the spectrum. That's the most successful way. So when somebody comes and approaches you with a spiritual question, a spiritual concern, it may just be a statement they make. You know, I've been thinking I need to have God in my life. Just a simple statement. And sadly, it can happen very often that somebody who's not looking for that will say, yeah, that'd be a good thing. See you tomorrow. And leave them in that situation where they just opened a door and said, come in, and you just keep going. One of the things somebody pointed out to me a long time ago was, because of preaching and training, was watching Jesus as you read about him and the way that he thought sermonically. How many times a situation happens, somebody says something, somebody approaches him in some way, or he, coming along, happens to approach them, and then takes a situation, all of a sudden he's teaching a lesson. He's thinking sermonically. In every situation, he's looking at everything and saying, how can I teach them from this? The parables. Think about the parables. If you don't take anything else that Jesus said, just in the parables alone, he's in a situation where he's understanding the people and what will bring a point across to them, and the next thing you know, he's in the middle of teaching them something. And it seems so natural, and it flows so easily. And, well, thinking evangelistically is going to be a part of our process too, if we're going to be who we should be. Thinking evangelistically means every time I see somebody out here in the world, I need to work on the idea that if I see a friend, it's not just, hey, great to see you, how you doing? If it's a neighbor, hey, hope everything's going well, you know, appreciate the food you brought over the other day. It's not just the normal day-to-day stuff, or a stranger, you just keep your head down and keep walking. But every person we see is a soul. Every person that we see is a soul. Whether they're walking somewhere and we meet them, whether they're driving a car, whether they're in a jail cell, at work, at school, gathered with their family at home, just sitting around enjoying a little bit of peaceful time alone. No matter where we see people and what they're doing or who they are souls. And they, as souls, are either, well, it shouldn't be either, they are saved, lost, or safe. They're in one of those conditions. If they've a child, they're young, then they're safe. They're not saved or lost. They've never sinned. They're pure. They're innocent. If they have gotten to a point of maturity and have sinned, then they are lost. Unless they have come to the blood of Jesus through the gospel for salvation, then they are saved. But every soul we meet is either pure, innocent soul that's never done any wrong, or they are lost or they are saved. That's everybody we meet. There is no more important thing in this life than the understanding of the need for the lost soul and the understanding of the benefit and blessing of the saved soul. We need to see that. We need to lock in on that. When somebody walks up to one of us and says, I think I need to have God in my life. I've been away from God all this time. I see a need. There should never be a soul-conscious person who would hear an approach like that and say, boy, you sure do. I'll see you tomorrow. We should be walking through an open door. We should be walking in and seeking to help. The same as if we were walking down the street and someone was approaching us and they burst into flames. Never seen it happen. I've heard of spontaneous combustion, never witnessed it. Any combustion I've ever seen was usually purposeful, not spontaneous. But if you were carrying a bucket of water and somebody was on fire, wouldn't you put it on them? You'd help them? Try to keep them from being harmed any worse than they would have to be? And we're talking about a soul, not a life, a physical life, a soul. When we think about prospects and we think about someone approaching us, it happens sometimes. It's not often, but it happens sometimes. We need to be ready for that. That is the difference between hitting a Randy Johnson fastball and hitting a ball off a tee. Some of you may not know who Randy Johnson is. He was a good pitcher. He could really throw it. I'd have a really hard time trying to hit a fastball off of him when I was a young man. But you put it on a tee, no problem. When they come to us, we need to be ready. We don't need to get ready, we need to be ready. Now, what about when it's not somebody coming to us? What about when we're having to reach out?
You talk about door knocking. If you give someone a piece of literature, especially if it's attractive, they may not show any interest in, they may lay it down somewhere. And later, when they're searching, they may remember, you knocking on their door.
Yes.
Sister Brenda and I, we're always anxious to get those seeds in the ground.
Yes.
My dad would tell me, there's no need in putting the seeds in the ground till the soil warms up. It's not going to do anything, it won't germinate. So later, they may warm up to the idea and see the piece of literature. In the mission field, it's been recorded that one track had been used by like 8 to 10 people.
That's great.
So you just don't know.
Yeah.
It's lying there. They may see that it has some value, it's put together really nice, and they may come for a visit then. They've warmed up to the idea. They need the Lord then.
Yes. Well, and that's always the possibility. If they have a Bible in their home, if they have some information pointing out truth in the Bible, it may be that they're not ready for it right now. They may become ready for it at another time. We don't know that, so we work to put stuff in their hands. We work to make sure they have information. Who are the best prospects if you're reaching out to them? Anybody who comes looking, whether they approach us personally, if they walk in through these doors when we're meeting and come in, guess what? Any visitor that's not a member of the church, sometimes we have visitors from other congregations, they're traveling, passing through, and visiting somebody in town, they come visit, that's wonderful. We love to meet brethren and get to see them, whether it's periodically or just one time. That's a great thing. But when people who are not members of the church come in, what has just happened?
They're looking.
You just had like an individual walking up to you saying, I'm looking for God. Can you help me? That's what they've just done in a public way. It's not a one-on-one conversation necessarily, but when they walk in, what have they just told us? I'm looking. I'm interested. I'm seeing some kind of need or desire. May not even recognize what it is yet, but I'm interested in what you have to offer. Now, perhaps they may go to 10 or 15 different places in the course of a few months or in a year, if they're starting to see a need or a desire.
I want to share something with you. Just read what the person checked on there.
One of our guest cards, if people fill them out when they're here, of course they filled out their name and number and address, but they checked a returning guest and checked I'm looking for a church home. That's great. It's good. It's good information to have that they can tell us what I'm looking for. That's wonderful. What are we going to do with it?
Reach out to them,
We'll send a card to them.
Okay?
make a phone call,
Okay?
invite them to lunch.
Great. I hadn't heard a wrong answer yet. It's all good. What are we going to do with it? We are going to reach out to them because they've already reached out to us. They came knocking on our door and said, I'm interested. Who are you? You're one, there's 15 more up and down this same road within a 20-mile stretch. Who are you? Are we going to answer?
What will happen if we don't?
Oh. If they're looking, they'll end up finding. They'll find something. They'll find someone. They will find someone who will take their hand when they reach out. They will. And it would be such a shame and what a wrong on our part for somebody to come with their hand already outstretched and us to allow someone else to take their hand and lead them wrongly. What a shame that would be. We ought to be running over each other, trampling each other, just shouldering each other aside as we're running to take that hand. Not literally. We ought to be in force, all of the same mind, all of the same desire, reaching out to a lost soul who's saying, help me. Now, we were following that with another question. Who are the best prospects if they're not coming looking for us? If we're stepping out and looking for them? Now, we can name the relationship, and friends, family, we can name the relationships. I want to just make it a little more practical. The people that you're around the most. The people that you know the best. Yes.
One of the things I think we're going to learn when Rob comes is that you know 10 people
Yeah.
who need the gospel. 10 people you work with, softball team your kids are on, or whatever. And you work on those 10 people. And
Yeah.
everybody has that list, that circle of influence they have.
Yes.
There's 10 people in Prospect who are not cold calls, who are people you have some relationship.
Some connection, some relationship.
And they know you, and they see your life, like kind of putting all those things together you were saying.
Well, and that's why they make the best prospects, because it does link all of those things. There's already some kind of relationship, be it friend, family, whatever. There's already some kind of rapport. There's already some witnessing of the person who's outside of Christ seeing the person who's in Christ, seeing the life that you live, the choices you make. Yes?
At least 40 or 50 of us have had pretty good experience with this concept. In our 20s, when we'd meet certain people, we'd notice whether or not they had a ring on their finger, and we'd strike up some sort of conversation,
Yeah.
and we would get a feel for the person, and maybe it didn't gel, but maybe there was enough that you kind of go, I've got a buddy who might gel well with this person. And so this whole idea of being a suitor, if you will,
Yeah.
is kind of a similar concept. And
Yes.
we've all had some experience with it.
Yes.
And we were very adamant at one point in our life about one way that we pursued that.
Yeah.
And I think if we kind of have that same attitude of, I don't know where this is going to go, and I'm not going to go in, we all know the guy who goes in way too headlong and,
Yes.
gets the barrier. No.
Yes.
So, and we've learned, hopefully, over time, how to be tactful and practical and approach people
Yeah.
and have that conversation. And there are people, I'd say everybody's a prospect, right? But there are some gold miners who don't have the equipment. They may find gold, but realize, I don't have the proper equipment for this job.
Yes.
And I've got a buddy who owns blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And so, if you have a good relationship with that friend and you keep that person at hand, you can put those two together.
That's right. And we'll get to that a little bit later with this as well. But yeah, that's a great understanding of who we are, our desires, our needs play a lot into everything that we do. If I don't need it and I don't desire it, guess what? It has nothing to do with my life. Now, there's some things I may not desire, but I need, so I look into that. If I desire it, I'll look into it just because I want to. But if it's not a need or a desire, you may like it. It may be something for you, but not for me. I don't spend my time on things that I don't need or want. Right? I don't give my energy to things that I don't need or want. I won't spend my money on things that I don't need or want. We invest in what we want or what we see we need. That's true in every facet of our lives.
Unless there's guilt or love involved.
Talking about willingly, yeah. We could be guilted into it, or we could be sacrificing. Now, when we start looking at the ideas of evangelism and the idea of pursuing someone for marriage, how about pursuing someone as a salesman, a salesperson? When you're looking at getting married, when you're 18, you might be dating and just having fun. This person is attractive to me. We have a good time together. Let's go out and have a meal. Let's go watch a movie. Let's go bowling. Whatever. I'm just having a good time. You get to a point of thinking about getting married, the game changes. Now there's a different interest in what's going on, so there's a different investment in what you're doing, what's going on. What if you're a salesman, a salesperson, and you're working to sell things, and if you sell things, you and your family get to eat. If you don't sell things, you don't get to eat. How do you work at sales? Does that change things? Yeah. You learn, you study, you work with strategy. It doesn't just mean that you just go harder at people. Sometimes just going harder at people runs them off. You go harder at your job. You train, you learn, you do the best you can do to be the most successful that you can be. Why haven't we done this in the church as evangelists? We've done it with worship. Oh, buddy, we can worship. If we can't do anything else, we can worship. Right? We can tell you the ins and outs, the rights, the wrongs. In fact, if you don't sing all the right verses of the song or you do a prayer before you were supposed to, we've got worship ironed out. We know worship.
Well, I think part of it is because evangelism is one part where there's a lot of gray.
Certainly.
And so the way I do it's going to be different from the way you do it. And so it's hard
Yes.
to preach truth
Yes.
in style of evangelism because there is no truth.
Yes. Now, and I've mentioned we will get to that in a little bit, but no, it's good to acknowledge that that's what's coming because that gives a little insight into what we're talking about right now that's going to be maybe hard to hear. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be standing and preaching and doing the same things in the same ways. That's good to acknowledge up front. But let's get something in our understanding. If we all are not evangelists, we don't need to be here.
I was just gonna say that I know from conversations and listening to the folks in this room, they have a heart for the souls of men.
Yes.
I hear it. I've heard people say to me many times, I've talked to a neighbor or a coworker or somebody who was working in my home. The point of this seminar is not to say we're not doing anything.
No, not at all.
The point of this seminar to me is to stoke the fire so that it burns hot.
Yes.
So that we have that's the foremost thing in our thinking.
Yes.
But that's
And,
what it should be.
and as we do this and stoke that fire, as we're saying what we're saying right now, I don't want it to come across as a punch in the gut. That's why I said I'm glad that's at least introduced a little bit, because there are many, many, many members of the church who are involved in evangelism in different ways, who if you ask them, are you an evangelist? They'd say, oh no, I could never do that. They don't even realize that they are. I'm saying evangelism is as much a part of being a member of the body of Christ as worship is. If we're not going to be evangelists, then what does worship mean? If we're not going to be the servants of God in the way that we live and the work that we do, then what is worship? Is worship important? Don't be scared. Yes, it is. Worship is very important. Yes. So is evangelism. Did the same God command them both? And expect that same involvement of all the members of the church? Yes. So, the difference between worship and evangelism, as we were just talking about, is in how it's defined and how it's pictured, how it's laid out. Worship is very well defined, very, very detailed in its definition. If you're going to worship me, here's what you're going to do. You're going to sing, you're going to pray, you're going to teach, preach God's word, you're going to partake of the Lord's Supper, you're going to give of your means. Very well defined. Very easy to see and understand if you read your scriptures. Old Testament worship was different. It's still very easy to see and understand. Here's what they did under Judaism. Here's what they did, less detail, under patriarchy. Judaism, very well detailed for us, what they did as they came to worship. In the church, very well detailed what we do as we come together and worship. Evangelism is talked about more generally. It's not talked about so specifically. We do know there are some things about evangelism that can involve public preaching. It could involve somebody coming in and preaching in a town where there's not a church and people turning out to hear them. And we used to call them gospel meetings, revival meetings, tent meetings, all kinds of things. You know, those things still happen today. They still happen today. People going somewhere walking into a city, a village, a community, and preaching, and people turning out to hear the preaching. And there wasn't a church there, people end up being converted, now there's a congregation there. It doesn't happen here. Why? Why don't we have that happen here? There's a lot of reasons. I'm sure you won't be wrong. Because the church has been here for a long time. It's been all through this country for a long time. Everybody's got a Bible. Most people have multiple Bibles. Been around for a while. It's hard to find a community that doesn't have some kind of church, that doesn't have some kind of religious teaching and belief, and typically to find that we have to go to other countries. So it's not going to be easy to go out on a street corner here and preach and actually get interest. Can you go on a street corner here and preach? You'll see that every once in a while. Somebody's out there with a bullhorn or a speaker and a microphone and hollering at every car that comes by. And once in a while, somebody may roll their window down and ask them what they're doing and ask for some material if they've got it. I've seen it happen. But largely, if people have their windows down, they roll them up. Well, no, that's old. It shows how old I am. They roll them up. It's a button now. You don't roll anything. But I can remember in times past seeing somebody out there and seeing people get their windows up in a hurry, and all of a sudden they find something over here of great interest as they drive through. I don't even want to make eye contact with the person. Like somebody standing on the corner hollering about Jesus has got to be crazy. And no telling what they'll do. I'm not questioning their motives or purposes or intents, but...
Are you ready to die?
Yeah, exactly. Get in with me. You ready to meet Jesus? I mean, we can preach publicly anytime we are allowed to preach publicly. We have the fortune of living in a country that has provided religious freedoms for a long time. They're being squelched more today than they ever have been in the past, but we're still able to preach publicly. We're still able to stand up and proclaim the truth, and any occasion that we could do that would be wonderful. Do it. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, call the fellow with the tools who can do it. Call somebody else and say, there's an opportunity to preach over here, come preach. Great. Get it done. Evangelism is being done when Christians are living their lives. When you make the choices you make. When you use the language that you use and don't use the language that is worldly. You're evangelizing. When you're in the store and you're walking through, and the people that work in the store and see you come through there all the time, and every time they see you come up to the register, you've got groceries and whatever you may need out of there. But what they don't ever see in your cart are things that are worldly. You're evangelizing. That person that sees you and then sees you again and then sees you again, they're starting to catalog a few things. And when you get to the counter and they see what's in your cart and what's not in your cart, and they have had 6 people come through that have chewed them out and talked ugly at them for something, and you step up there and say, how are you doing today? You know what you're doing? You're evangelizing through kindness. When you're sitting at a table in a restaurant and a server comes over there and let me tell you something. You've never worked a real job until you've worked a job where you serve people all day long. Whatever that job is, when you work a service job where you deal with people face to face all day long, you have worked. Because you put up with a lot of bad attitude. No telling why. They may have a good reason to have a bad attitude today. But they dump it on you because you're the one serving them at the moment. So they pour it all out on you. So guess what? After you've heard 15 different people today pour out their difficulties on you, Whether they explain it or not, usually not. Usually you just get the attitude. Then guess what? That 16th person that's sitting there and you come up to wait on them, to serve them, to help them, it would feel nice if they give you a look to backhand them, right? You can't do that. So what happens is, I might express a bad attitude because I've taken a lot today. It's weighing me down. I'm tired of dealing with it. And so they may show up and they may not be the most bubbly, happy helper at that moment. And you sit down at the table and you say, "Boy, you look troubled today. Why don't you tell me what's going on? How's your day been? I care about you." You know what you're doing? You're evangelizing. Yes.
I worked with this guy at Lockheed who was a Mormon. I said, "How do you happen to be a Mormon?" He said, "I was visiting a neighbor one Saturday. These two young Mormon guys came up on their bicycles, and this neighbor slapped him. And he said the Mormon just turned the other cheek." He said, "That's why I'm a Mormon."
That's a great sight, isn't it? There are lots of people who learn good morals, who learn good attributes, and they may not be Christians, but they've learned good things from God. And we can appreciate that no matter who it is.
Fine prospect.
Yes.
I remember hearing this black brother speak on a lectureship who was known for his many conversions. He said, "Where do I find people for Bible studies?" He said, "Two places, the funeral home and the hospital."
We were talking about that a while ago. People who have just gone through or are still going through troubling and hurtful things are usually more open.
I think our biggest problem with teaching, with evangelism, can be summarized in a mass casualty exercise I had, where there was a man who had shrapnel in his arm. He was stable, he was hurt, he was sitting, and there was a guy bleeding out from his leg. And we just didn't have enough people. And we took the gentleman who had the hurt arm, who was stable, and said, "Take your good arm, hold it right there. Stop that bleeding." And so many times we feel because we're injured in some way, and we all are, that we just have to sit and wait for somebody to come help us. We're not able to help someone else.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just have to look and say, "Yeah, I got my problems, and I'm not saying I'm better than you, but I can put my hand on this wound and help you despite what I'm going through right now."
That's
Because
right.
we don't feel worthy. Who am I to speak to you because I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
It's okay. Don't act like you don't have a hurt arm, but help that person where they are.
That's right. Evangelism is not about people who are better helping people who are worse. It's not what it's about. It's about showing people to the same one who helped me and is still helping me. Showing them that the same person can help them too.
Talk about a prospecting story I heard of a family during that 1849 rush. They sold everything, moved out west, bought all these tools, spent years digging for gold. Finally sold everything for pennies on the dollar, and the person who bought the tools with the next strike found gold.
Yeah.
The purpose there is don't quit.
Yes.
Don't. Keep going, no matter how you feel.
Yeah, even if it feels fruitless at the moment, it still needs to be done. Yeah. Yeah. You may be planting the seed, or you may be tilling and preparing the soil. We don't know where the other person is when we start the process. We might see that as we come along. But the point of prospecting is getting to gold. And I'm not going to say that's the salvation of the soul. I'm going to say that's the Bible study. The point of prospecting is getting to the study, getting someone to sit down with an open Bible and hopefully with an open heart. We'll stop right here. Lord willing, we'll continue next week.